Redemption Rock is a glacial stone outcropping made out of granite and in the shape of a flat-topped ledge on a 1/4 acre reservation in Princeton, Massachusetts. It's mere feet from the road, but still eerily quiet. Obviously, it's also where teenagers go to make out and drink. Damn kids. Anyway, it also happens to be historically significant in a very important setting in the very first worldwide best-selling book. Check it out for yourself and you're going to see this inscription. Don't touch it though, you never know what some gross teenagers did to it. Upon this rock, May 2nd, 1676, was made the agreement for the ransom of Mrs. Mary Rowlandson of Lancaster between the Indians and John Hoar of Concord. King Philip was with the Indians but refused his consent. That inscription tells the story of the ransom of Mary White Rowlandson. This is her story. In order to fully understand Redemption Rock, you really have to understand the cast of characters. It's nothing without them and how they interacted during the long and brutal King Philip's War, and it all starts with the man himself. Now, I've covered parts of King Philip's life at slightlyoddfitchburg.com, link in the description, and this is yet another way that he greatly influenced the history of the world. His real name was Metacomet, and he was in charge of the Wampanoag. At this point in time, he was also the quarterback for the Narragansett and Nipmuc tribes. That's because there was a war on, and he was its chief instigator. King Philip's War is dense in its history and covers a lot of land. For this video, we'll just talk about one raid on February 10th, 1676. That was when Metacomet allowed Minocco of the Nipmuc to lead hundreds of his men on an attack against Lancaster, Massachusetts. It was swift, severe, and ended with 24 captive colonists in tow. That's where the story of Redemption Rock really begins. Mary White was an English lass born in 1637 in Somerset. Things would have been perfectly fine if not for her family constantly being surrounded by so many filthy Brits in their fully settled society. That's why they picked up stakes and left for the shores of the New World when Mary was in her early teens. It was sometime before 1650 when the family settled in a rustic little place called Salem. That would only last for a few years though. I mean, seriously, can you really take that much Salem in your life? 1653 saw them relocate to Lancaster, and that's where Mary would meet Reverend Joseph Rowlandson. The two were married in 1658 when she was 19 years old. They started popping out children between the years of 1658 and 1669 and ended up with 4 of the things. One of them passed away very young, so Mary and Joseph were left with 3 children, good societal standing, and a nice house. That's how life would find her when the night of February 10th fell. Of the 24 captives taken that night, 4 of them happened to be Rowlandsons, consisting of the now 30-year-old Mary and her 3 children. Her sister was also taken, but she wasn't technically a Rowlandson, so screw her. They were all immediately taken on a grueling journey through the unsettled wilds. Mary, unfortunately, had to watch her 6-year-old daughter succumb to wounds she sustained in the attack. The family, now numbering 3, plus her sister, would spend the next 11 weeks and 5 days as prisoners. Naturally, you have to find a way to survive and eat. Mary did this by making clothes for her native captors. She would literally sew them things to wear, and they would give her food to eat. She was kept separate from the rest of her family, and the Nipmuc and Narragansett liked to keep changing the way they treated her. Sometimes they'd be all nice and trade her a lot of food. They'd also let her read her Bible, which kept her sane. Other times, they'd starve her for no good reason at all. That's just how they rolled. For reference, this was her home before she got kidnapped, starved, and mistreated. All throughout the 11 weeks, the natives were working hard to stay one step ahead of the English colonists. They knew the terrain, so all they had to do was stay on the move until they got back to King Philip. Mary and the other prisoners were brought before him so he could decide what to do with them. That's when he just straight up asked her how much her husband would buy her back for. She was like, like $20 probably, and that was all he needed to hear. Enter John Hoar. This Hoar was born in 1622 and served as a militia leader and as a liaison between the colonists and the natives. Like most Hoars, he was also a lawyer, so he knew how to talk and law good. Anyway, Joseph Rowlandson approached him and asked him how big a pain it would be to possibly talk to the natives about getting his wife and children back. John was all like, I got you, fam. Your favorite Hoar is on the case. So he set off with 2 guides and headed for King Philip's crib at Wachusett Lake. This was before Uber, so it took a little while. Still though, the now exhausted dirty Hoar managed to win the family's release. On May 2nd, 1676, after 11 full weeks of captivity and the death of her daughter, Mary Rowlandson was released by the natives. Everyone met at Redemption Rock to settle the deal. Hoar would hand over 20 pounds and the natives would hand over Mary. Don't think that was a trivial amount of money though. This is still in 1676 pounds. Adjust that for inflation and you're talking over 5,557 pounds and 40 pence. In freedom dollars, that equals $7,067.37. 7 cents. That's what it took for this one dirty whore to get an entire family off. This is the plaque of the old homestead. This whole thing got an astounding number of rock inscriptions. Mary White Rowlandson was finally reunited with her children, her sister, and her husband in Boston. The whole ordeal was so much that they were all just like, screw it. Rather than deal with driving all the way back to Lancaster, they just bought a house in the city and stayed there. That's where Mary would write the very first worldwide bestseller, quote, a narrative of the captivity and restoration of Mrs. Mary Rowlandson, unquote. It was the entire story of her encounter and sold in both New England and original flavor England. In it, she talks about everything that happened during those 11 weeks. She talks about watching her daughter die. She talks about watching her friends die on the night of the attack, and she talks about how she was treated. You can still read it, and you totally should. It's a real piece of history written by the person who lived it. So that's pretty much the story of Mary Rowlandson and Redemption Rock. The family would move one last time to Connecticut in 1676. Reverend John Rowlandson passed away in November of 1678. Mary went on to remarry a feller named Captain Samuel Talcott. She would move back to Boston and eventually pass away at the age of 73 on January 5th of 1677. The end. Hey, thanks for listening. If you like odd and haunted history, please subscribe to Slightly Odd America on YouTube and like and follow Slightly Odd America on the podcast app of your choice. You can also join in on the fun by following us at facebook.com/thenewslightlyOddFitchburg. We're always asking for story suggestions and sharing updates on what's coming next. You can also help support this whole thing by buying your very own copy of Slightly Odd Fitchburg, The Odd and Haunted History of Central Massachusetts. It's filled with New England folklore and stories that we've been researching for years, and you can get it in paperback, digital print, and even as an audiobook. You can find links to everything in the description as well as on slightlyoddfitchburg.com. That's also where we have handmade, custom-built Ouija boards and super fun t-shirts. There are many more stories to share, so until next time, keep being odd and proud.